3:30 p.m. and we are live. Right, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to, where are we? Episode 29 of One Chat Live. And well, again, I mean, every week I start off with, have I got a great speaker for you? But if you we're having this chat offline actually. In theory, if you work with runners and you are staying in kind of contact with the latest evidence and research, etc., you should know this name like the same as you know who the president or the queen or king of your country is. And yet I still come across therapists when I'm kind of talking about the conference we got in October who maybe aren't familiar with the name. But really, if you are into the research and you follow anything to do with hip strengthening or gait retraining or patellofemoral pain or Achilles tendinopathy, then Dr. Rich Willy should definitely just be a household name for you. So if it's not, I'm very excited because we're going to introduce him to you today. If it is, then it should be a great opportunity for you to, obviously, if you're watching live, you're welcome to ask some questions, to leave comments. If you listen to the podcast, then feel free to leave some comments underneath. We'll give contact details for Dr. Rich Willy as well, so you can contact him. He's very active on Twitter. So that's going to be coming up very shortly. We're going to be looking at tips for the older runner, for the masters runner, which, I don't know, maybe because of my modesty, I don't like to call myself a master runner. It just sounds like I'm too good, but that's the official name. We're looking at anything around 40 years plus. Differences that start when you reach that age or 35 years onwards, and changes you need to make in order to reduce that injury and maintain or increase your performance. Before we do that, I just want to mention, as always, our sponsors. The Brighton Beer Company are kind enough to sponsor this show. Let's just give them a little flash here. If you are of the hirsute kind on your face and you're into your balms and oils and combs and brushes and anything which generally makes you look good and smell nice, then do head over to the Brighton Beard Company .co.uk. They do ship international as well. I'm biased because I've used them for years and obviously they sponsor the show. But I do urge you to go over there. The good news is, as of Monday, if you use the code RCL15, so RCL stands for One Chat Live, RCL15, you get 15% off any products on there. So that is great news. As of Monday, okay, that kicks in. Right, so that said and done, we'll give Rich his 5-second countdown and we will get into this episode of One Chat Live 19, all about the aging masters. Okay, good. Where are we? Morning for you, is it, Rich?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
it is.
Morning.
How are you doing, mate?
Good afternoon to you.
Thank you very much. How civilized. Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope I didn't big you up too much as a household name that you should be, but do you feel that everyone knows you, or do you feel you've still got a message to be told out there?
No, I don't. But thanks for that. I appreciate it. It's very nice.
Well, it's so true. Good. I like to make my guests feel special. But it's so true. It's like, I remember a while back, I had Elizabeth Barnes, who's kind of won the Marathon des Sables, and she's big on the Ultra Mirage, which I'm going to in October. And cool. I said to her, I think it came out all wrong. I said, why do people talking about Kim Kardashian instead of you? And it was kind of like a bit of an on-the-spot question, but it just frustrates me that people know who Kim Kardashian is and that they don't know who people like the winner of the Marathon des Sables is. It's like, especially with women, where we're trying to big up female athletes and make them household names for kids and that. And I don't know what it is. I think it's the media. It might be something to do with our president and prime minister. I don't know. Something's going on. But anyway, we shall move away that. So, what are you up to? How are you today? What are you up to?
I'm doing great. It's Sunday, and so it's beautiful. I live in Missoula, Montana, which is in the mountains, and another beautiful morning. And so I'll head out for a run here in a little bit once we get done. So yeah, other than that, it's a great time here in the summer.
I think I saw some photos. Was it yesterday? Were you out somewhere spectacular? I think I saw some photos somewhere. Was that you?
Yeah, I did. So it's kind of one of our backyard mountain peaks, and so I ran up to that, and I have a kind of a multi-day run that I'm doing later on this month. So I'm trying to up my running volume so I can be prepared for that and enjoy myself rather than make it a sufferfest. So so that's a good run. It's about, I think it's 18 miles and about 4,000 feet in gain. So So it's a pretty stiff run, but yeah, we're so fortunate to have runs like that and the access we have to the wilderness here in Missoula.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah, I love the photos. It's inspirational. I suppose there's always the grass is greener, but some of the background and the drop you've got over in that part of the world are quite amazing. Someone else to run. You're a lucky man. Anyway, so so running. You've been in this game quite a long time, haven't you? I say your household name, but you've been practicing clinically for how many years now?
Yeah, this is my 20th year. I've been a PT since 1999, which I can't believe. So of course, if you do the math, you'll see that I'm a master's runner. So
I was gonna say,
but no, yeah, I've been doing it for a while. I got my PhD. I finished my PhD in 2011. I got my PhD with Irene Davis at the University of Delaware. So I was a clinician, full-time clinician before that for 8 years, and then even now I still treat. I guess it depends on the week. Probably 4 to 8 hours a week I treat in the clinic. So yeah, and that's something I think is pretty important. I think for researchers to continue to do is treat patients. I think if you don't, I think what you end up doing becomes largely theoretical. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, for example, today we're going to be talking about master runners, and I definitely am. So it kind of makes it useful because I imagine you've probably been through some of the things you're going to talk about today in your own running.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, I certainly have and am. And I'm going to try not to make this all about me today, but I might be asking you a few questions about my calves. But anyway,
no, I think that's fair because I think injuries like that, those are pretty typical of. If you're a master's runner and you're tuning in today, it's probably some of the things that you've maybe dealt with in the past or are dealing with now. So I'm happy to talk about that.
Definitely. And I do always, I mean, after this finishes, there's lots of people leave comments, but there still seems to be a little bit of apprehension of actually answering questions. Maybe it's the status kind of the guests I've had.
Of us? No, I'm happy to hop on.
No, not me. It's you. I think people are scared to ask you questions like, he can't be bothered with little old me. No, definitely, if you're out there watching, guys and ladies and men, and definitely ask some questions. This is your opportunity to get it from the top. So, okay, so masters runners. First of all, let's just classify. I mean, is there I suppose there can't be, but what sort of age is going to make you a masters runner?
Well, it all depends on the organization. So like for the world track and field, they consider anything above, I believe, 35 to be masters. USA running kind of considers anything to be above 40 to be the masters runner. So from I guess how many trips around the sun kind of classification, I guess that's how you would probably do it. I think from a biomechanical and physiological standpoint, really we probably start seeing these changes when people are in their mid-30s. So I think maybe for our purposes today, I think mid-30s is kind of a good place to kind of start thinking about these things. And if you're not experiencing them yet, or they're not apparent yet, it's probably a good time to really start thinking seriously about them.
Okay, and this is a lot of this to do with kind of hormone levels, like testosterone? Is that where the changes are coming from?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, like all things, they're kind of multifactorial, but one of the, I think maybe you can kind of split it up into a couple different changes when you look at running. You can look at physiological changes and then also the biomechanical and kind of tissue related changes. So I do want to give major props to my co-author on a review paper that we wrote, which we'll probably be referencing a little bit today, and that's Max Paquette. He's at the University of Memphis, and he's done so much work in this area, and so have a lot of other people in this area. So I want to make sure I give props to them. Paul DeVita, East Carolina, has done a lot of work in this area as well. So so I think though that when you look at those different changes, what some of the things that happens, it's inevitable we lose some cardiovascular function as we age, and it's just one of those things that it happens to all of us. But with that said, though, whether you run or you don't run, that makes a very big difference in the amount of change that you experience. So aerobic capacity of like a runner in their 80s, someone who's been regularly training, is about double that of a runner someone who hasn't been running. So running, it kind of seems to slow that decline in aerobic function. So I think for I mean, I think everybody kind of can recognize that, but I think to put a number on it, I think the fact that you're going to have double the aerobic capacity at age 80 than your non-running peers, I think is a pretty good reason to continue running. I also think too that, when you think about running, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to run. And I think besides just being able to fit into your pants a little bit easier maybe, and, work on it, keep your aerobic capacity up. I mean, there's so many important psychosocial benefits to running, as well as improving connective tissue health and so forth. But going back to what happens as we age, we definitely lose some cardiovascular function, and so our the VO2 max, which is the total amount of oxygen at your peak when you're at full exertion that you're consuming, tends to decline, and so we lose about 7% of your VO2 max per decade. And that's a strong determinant of racing performance. And so when you look at, some of the things when we talk about decline in running performance that occurs, we lose about 8%. And like when you look at finishing times, as I look at athletes across, the different age groups, they decline about 8% per decade as well. So those two things are occurring kind of at the same time. So I think that's certainly something to think about. Our max heart rate, we lose about 0.7 beats per minute per year between the ages of 20 and 90. So we have a cardiovascular system that essentially is starting to kind of slowly lose some capacity, as we age.
Do you think these changes you mentioned, are they going to be more apparent in kind of the more elite runner, or is the recreational runner going to notice them as much as well?
Yeah, I think that's a super question. And, it's really hard because, we kind of need these long-term longitudinal studies where we follow runners over the course of their lifespan, which means we have to sit around and wait for those results to come out. So they're difficult to do, and they're expensive, and I mean, it's tracking people down and so forth. But there have been a couple of studies that have looked at this, and what it ends up happening is that when you can kind of divide people up into three different types of runners. We kind of take a look at the highly trained aging runner. We can kind of look at more like the kind of fitness type runner who's kind of running for just overall health benefits, and then we can kind of look at someone who's not running. And when you look at those things, the decline and VO2 max, it affects the person who's not training the most, as you would expect, followed by that regular fitness trainer. And then for the someone who is that elite trainer between like the ages of 20 and their mid 40s, they're only losing about less than 6% of their VO2 max per decade, versus for someone who is not training whatsoever, they're losing 15%. So it's you're almost looking at a third the loss of your VO2 max if you continue to run at a high level. So, and you look at just recently and from the U.S., Bernard Lagat, who is a famous middle distance runner here. I mean, he just set the I think the U.S. Masters marathon record in Australia, I think just last weekend. I think he ran a 2:12. So I think he's 44. So that's pretty spectacular. I mean, you can, if you continue to train and run at very high levels, and kind of continue to challenge yourself, there seems to be, you kind of tend to preserve that aerobic function, certainly to a larger degree than if you're just going out and running for fitness.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And how about, is there any differences? Because you see, obviously, you're at the head of the research, but between men and women, is the age similar where you start noticing these kind of deficits, or can it vary?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think if we probably go back and look at those studies, I think that the decline is, I don't think that they split them up between males and females.
Right.
But there are probably some biological sex specific changes that are occurring, but that's not something I've seen in the literature, that at least that I'm aware of. But that's a great question. Are there sex specific age related changes with running, I mean, kind of physiology and performance? I
don't think they've done a study, but observing, I mean, definitely guys by the time they get to about 30, 35, and this is well documented, they make that noise when you get out of a chair or a car seat, and you get that, And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced it. I don't really see women doing it, but guys get to that age. I don't know whether that's actually physiologically responsible or just, but it definitely happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my wife might have some theories on that, but I think she would tell you that I probably am a little more dramatic, but than I probably need to be. So, but yeah, I mean, so aging and running, like I said, so like multifactorial. It's a large psychosocial component to it too. I mean, we get into our mid-30s, and it's like when I was in my 20s, I could go for a run any time of the day. And, even into the night, I would sometimes, if I didn't get my run in, I would jump out and go out for a run at 11 o'clock at night. I have a 5.5-year-old now, and, he's a bit of a gremlin. He takes up a lot of my time and energy, and I can't just leave all the time. And so that makes it a little bit tougher. Not to blame my decline in running performance on my 5.5-year-old. That wouldn't be very fair, but things change. We get a job, and you have life stress. I know I can speak for myself that my sleep quality is not quite as good as it used to be, and I know too that when I get stressed, and my sleep quality certainly declines, and all those things kind of carry over to the running that we do. And so one of the things, I think there's something to this, and when you look at those kind of longitudinal data, but I really think that there's something to the fact that, are we losing running performance and function because we're aging, or is it more so because of changes in our running training practices and our overall health? And so, I think and I'm not saying you need to continue to train like you're a 16-year-old, but I think if we continue to work in our, high or fast runs, like maybe go to the Tuesday night track workouts, if we continue to kind of, target some races throughout the year, and really kind of target specific times, it's like all things. If you measure it, it's going to matter. If you don't measure it, you'll probably kind of lose track of it. So I think that there's a real intensity component that we probably lose as we age. And again, I think it's a psychosocial thing. We tend to start running the same speed all the time, and rather than kind of doing better training practices, like what we considered like a polarized training approach, where you're either running really, really high intensity or kind of lower intensity, which is, we know from a lot of research that's coming out in aerobic athletes, that's really the best way to train.
Yeah, I think, you've nailed it on the head. Like, I remember when I was younger, you would get up at 1 o'clock in the morning, you'd open an eye and go, oh, I'm not tired, to go for a run. And, you look at that across the week or a month or a year, and it would make all the difference. But that's what must make research so difficult. There are these psychosocial factors, like, can I be bothered? It's that voice in your head where you do actually maintain that pace, or you finish the run. Or I think naturally, as you get older, for most masters runners, you've just got less of that. You haven't got so much to prove, have you, to yourself?
Yeah.
Not for everybody. It's generalizing, and I think that's part. You have to have that to be able to put up with kids, to be able to get on with life at an older age. You've got to lose. So, you've got to become a little bit more humble, haven't you? And not kind of, especially, and then if you settle down with one person, if you find your partner, and then suddenly, I'm sure this goes for men and women. You just haven't got. Partners might kill me. My wife might. You haven't got so much to prove, have you? It's not like you're stepping out your front door and thinking, right, who's going to be the mother of my children every day, which is what you do when you're single. And it's true, though, isn't it?
No comment.
No
comment. I know my wife will watch this, so no comment. But
it's kind of like that when you go out for a run. You step out the door and you haven't got that teenage kind of, right, this is the only day I'm care about in my life, and I'm going to make this a killer run. And it's just not there, is it, really?
Yeah. Well, it's funny though. I think that there's, going back to the psychosocial part of it. I just with my travels and so forth. What you kind of describe is, I see that a lot in the U.S. And there's definitely some masters runners who are still bringing it at races and finishing, at least certainly where I live, finishing really quite high. But you look at some other countries, like when I go to Scandinavia, the Norwegians are really good about this. They kind of back off a little bit in their 20s, and then when they hit 40, man, it's on. And I don't know if there are many, I guess, anybody who's more intense at that age group than the masters Scandinavian. you know.
Right.
So and at least in my experiences, they all seem to be, they've all got goals and so forth. So I think that kind of goes back to like just how important that is to kind of really have some goals. And I mean, of course, if it's, you know, if it's important to you, you know, if it's not important to you, you don't have to do it. But if you're looking to continue to run fast and you know, and you know, I think you definitely need to have some intensity and some goals.
Yeah, definitely. And it can be done. You just got to, just kind of change the chip a little bit and make sure the people around you understand. And because that's the other thing, you know, you've got to find time, even if you're working more and you've got kids, you might get a guilt trip saying, oh, I can't really go out. But
Mm-hmm.
if you want to keep up, yeah.
Yeah,
What about when it comes to actual injuries then? Let's get down to what we do know about. Do the injuries change? Do you see different injury patterns in older athletes?
yeah, for sure. And so, you know, I think a good thing to do is maybe contrast the teenage or adolescent runner with the masters runner. When we're younger, we tend to get kind of more bony injuries. So medial tibial stress syndrome, I think, kind of that's commonly called, you know, like shin splints, or patellofemoral pain. You know, IT band pain, those are kind of going to be more the types of injuries that your adolescent runner is going to experience. So if you can kind of think more kind of bony or articular injuries when we're younger, and then things kind of shift as we get older. They tend to shift more toward below the knee injuries. We see a lot more soft tissue type injuries. So you know, knee pain is not a big issue with the masters runner. But and shin splints or even tibial stress fractures are not a big issue for the masters runner. But we see a big shift towards soft tissue injuries. So things like, you know, much greater incidence of plantar fasciopathy, Achilles tendinopathy, calf strains. So plantar flexor type injuries are the real biggies when we're looking at the runner over the age of 40.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that, I mean, has there been conclusions then that that's to do with the loss of kind of strength and thresholds in muscle and soft tissue? Do you think that's what it's down to?
Yeah, so we lose. So, you know, I think it's worth, you know, appreciating the fact that the plantar flexors have such a massive role in running. I think a lot of time, I think the lay person, and particularly if you pick up runner's world, at least in the United States, you'll kind of walk away with the impression that running is a gluteus or gluteal dominant exercise, that we're using our hip extensors so much. But really running, you know, is about 50 to 55% of our kind of our total support of our body comes from our plantar flexors. And so that's a massive part. And so as we age, we start to lose function in those plantar flexors. We tend to lose more muscle mass in our plantar flexors, and we tend to lose tendon stiffness. And that's maybe worth kind of talking about for a second. But, you know, generally, like when we think about like a really efficient musculotendinous unit, we like to think of it as being stiff. And because running is essentially, you're essentially storing energy when you land, and then those tendons are then releasing that energy. And so if you can kind of think about your tendons almost as a rubber band, you're stretching it and then it's releasing, stretching it and releasing. If you were to choose between two different rubber bands and you wanted to be a good runner, you'd probably go for a stiffer tendon or a stiffer rubber band. But even though like older people, maybe in the 30s, they start getting up, and they start groaning, they feeling like they're getting stiff. But really the reality is that it's a very steady decline in tendon stiffness. So we lose that ability to kind of store and release energy as we age. And as a result, then when we land and hit the ground, we get more tendon strain, and meaning that the tendon, rather than kind of being this thing that kind of stretches and then snaps back, it kind of, because it's less stiff, just think about that as a less stiff rubber band, it's going to stretch more. And then when it stretches more, the likelihood that you're going to get some sort of micro damage to the tendon or to the plantar flexors that are attached to it. And of course, that tendon is kind of, it's not like the tendon just ends and the muscle begins. The tendon, and there's that interdigitation that's occurring between the muscle fibers and the tendon. They kind of just works its way up. So you tend to have a little bit greater tendency to experience plantar flexor type injuries, as we age. And it's not just from It's not just from an injury risk standpoint, but that also really affects our running biomechanics too. We tend to lose about a 13% reduction in our step length between the ages of 20 and 60 years of age. And the largest contributor to that is a loss of ankle power, so plantar flexor power, so our ability to kind of push off from the ground. So when if you're out sometime and you have a chance to kind of maybe go to a race and observe, runners of all different ages running by you, look at the younger runners and how much ankle function is occurring. You can see how much they're pushing off from there. When you look at, the older runners, particularly once they, older runners get up into their mid 50s. And so you'll kind of see almost kind of a dead kind of push off type pattern. So, and when we age, back to the injury thing, one of the things that happens then is that we tend to get more Achilles tendinopathy and those calf strains and so forth. And if we continue to get injuries to that, I think that probably snowballs into the fact that we tend to lose even more and more of that push off power that we would kind of really need from our plantar flexors.
Yeah, no, some brilliant points which I hope people listening to this, particularly runners, should bear in mind is, like you say, we actually want to have stiff tendons. We need them. The analogy you use of the rubber band, it's actually, I normally use a spring, but in actual fact, when you look at the lengthening and the shortening, it's better the way you do it because it is a stretch followed by a shortening. But it's I always say it's compared to, would you want to have a slinky there, or do you want to have a pogo stick? If you're trying to spring on a slinky. So it's the same idea. And again, definitely in the UK, most runners, or a lot of runners, are still obsessed with this idea of avoiding stiffness, of having flexibility, being able to touch the toes, of being able to perform incredibly when you line runners up for a kneeling kind of knee to wall test, the further they can get their foot from the wall, the happier they are, as if that's good, isn't it? And you kind of have to break that kind of actually, you might be a little bit too flexible. We might want to get rid of some of that movement and turn it into something a bit more reactive. So it's a big thing.
Yeah, when you look at the Achilles tendinopathy research, there kind of seems to be it is almost like this kind of Goldilocks zone when it comes to going back to what you're talking about from an ankle flexibility standpoint. To me, it makes the most sense if you have someone who is hyper flexible in their ankle. They have a lot of dorsiflexion. That person's going to be at greater risk for Achilles tendinopathy. But again, if you look at the other end of the extreme, that your risk is a little bit higher if you're very stiff there as well. But going back to stretching though, and I think that's worth kind of talking about for a brief second, that I think also, runners, I think we need to do a much better job of educating runners that, really to even improve flexibility, stretching is really not the best way to do it, and it's really strength training. Is the best way to improve muscle flexibility. And at the same time, when you're doing that, it makes the tendon much stiffer. And so strength training, and I always tell runners, if you like stretching and stretching makes you feel good, again, because we want to always try to keep in mind that there's a big psychological component to injuries. If you like stretching, that's great. I won't tell you to stop doing it, but I would tell you, if you're pressed for time, your time's going to be much better spent doing some heavy strength training.
We got plenty of material on older episodes of this on stretching. I harp on about it. I go over the top too much. It's always been a bug of mine. I always kind of claim that if runners spend as much time as they do strengthening as they do stretching, then they suffer a lot less injury, and we'll probably put a lot of physios and kind of sports therapists out of practice. But I think that's it's one of the big problems. But anyway, let's have a look at what was I going to mention? I do enjoy, I think there's a few videos online. I think you might mention it as well. Just a hopping test, just to show the difference between a younger or just a teenager or a 20-year-old hopping up and down as fast as they can. Compare that to somebody who's 35, 40, and then you slow it down. You can see the difference in that reactive power. I think that it just shows clearly the difference that aging can make.
If I can just comment on that just real briefly, going back to what you were talking about, the spring, that typically when you look at it from a purely biomechanical standpoint, we think about running and hopping as what we call a mass spring model. So the mass, of course, is your body mass, and your springs are your tendons and connective tissues. And running is definitely a mass spring exercise or activity. Walking is not. So running is not just fast walking. But if you really want to see mass spring activity or function, single leg hopping, really can assess the mass spring model probably the best. And so that's why you can see some, like a runner, they're going to look okay running, or they look like they can kind of get it done. But when you ask a runner who's having some trouble with their tendons and so forth, ask them to do some single leg hopping, and that it's going to become pretty apparent when they're doing that.
Yeah. So how much, let's imagine you get the older runner in. Let's imagine and you show them how they're running, and you show them how actually they're shuffling along, and maybe you explain it, explaining why they're shuffling now and why they're not really getting from A to B very far because of kind of a lower stride length. How much would you use gait retraining to introduce that? To restore that stride length, or would you try slowing down cadence, or do you put it the other way around where you try and build up strength first so that they naturally change their running form, or do you accept that you're a master's runner, this is the way you should be running now?
Yeah, I think that's where we are. We don't know that answer yet. And so for me, I would say, well, two things. Achilles tendinopathy or calf strains. I tend to never change a runner's gait with those injuries. And the reason is, so let's go the opposite direction. If you increase cadence, that it does reduce the demand on the plantar flexors a little bit, but not a ton. And of course, if you increase cadence or reduce cadence, I mean, you're going to take a longer step. You have to push off a little bit more forcefully. But I don't know. Clinically, I don't seem to have a lot of success with changing stride length or changing running cadence when it comes to altering loads on below the knee. I think cadence is probably most effective. If we're looking at reducing knee loads, I think that's probably the best. And I think too, some impact forces it responds very well to changes in cadence. But yeah, I know I'm not really answering your question, but the true answer is we don't really know. And so I think for me, I have a hard time changing a runner's gait unless I can feel super confident that this is going to make a big difference for them. We know though that they're going to get much more bang for their buck with doing a great strengthening program, maybe some changes in footwear, and probably some counseling on training loads. I think is going to probably be where you're going to get the most benefit out of them. But I think that your idea about reducing cadence, so encouraging them to take a longer step length, is a good one. We don't know. There are two different schools of thought there. Maybe you can train plantar flexor performance and try to increase that step length by doing that. Then there's the other school of thought that would say that, well, that's kind of their optimal mechanic or optimal movement strategy for the resources that they have, meaning plantar flexor function and so forth. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm in clinic, then I tend to try and put them both together. So, because we know that studies have shown that just because you get stronger, for example, at calf raises, or you do your kind of seated soleus raises, that's not necessarily going to translate to a difference when you're running, because running is going to be like a blueprint and habit as well. So I kind of try and put the two together. So they do their 30-second, maybe lower cadence and focusing on a little bit of a pushback or some kind of like external cue, but they're doing the strength training at the same time so they can actually, maintain that pushback. So, but it's, like you say, it's going to depend on the individual, and it's all a bit part of the jigsaw, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think though, yes, I mean, obviously we're not going to see changes in running biomechanics per se. At least we haven't seen that yet with strength training, whether it be the strength in the hip abductors or the plantar flexors. But we do know that runners who tend to have more intensity in their runs, this is some nice work from Max Paquette. We do know that they don't lose ankle power as quickly. And we know that there are some other times when you can kind of, that demands more ankle power, such as uphill running. And again, faster running. I think that if you're doing more of those types of runs, I think that's probably going to maybe be a good way to, I don't know about restore plantar flexor function. I want to be a little bit cautious in saying that these things are going to suddenly reverse aging, but it certainly will help slow that loss of that function as we age.
Yeah, which brings you on to another question. So we'll probably come back to strength training in a second, as in
Yeah, of
like
course.
what exercise is and do you need a gym? But because you mentioned it now, like, probably the best way to become a stronger runner is to try and tweak your sessions so you're doing things like uphill running and getting stronger whilst you run. So would it make sense for old? Because I wonder whether slightly older runners start thinking, oh, I shouldn't be doing hills anymore. I shouldn't be doing intervals anymore. But could it almost be the other way around? If you're older, you really should be making sure you get this intensity in.
Yeah, that's what I would say that. I think that, I mean, I think if you were to ask me like what would be the best recommendations for the masters runner, I would say strength train so that you improve the capacity of your plantar flexors and then go out and use more of that capacity. I think that I think where older runners maybe get themselves in trouble, and I hope no one walks away from this podcast with this idea that, oh, I'm going to go out and do some sprints today. That, when you do that, of course, the faster we run, you're using more and more of your capacity of your plantar flexors. And what I mean by capacity is like the total amount of force that they can produce. So if you, through strength training, raise that ceiling a little bit, then you go out and then train up into that ceiling a little bit more with doing some speed work or hill work. I think that to me makes the most sense. Again, we don't know that we know there's no study out there that's been done that's a training study. I suspect that there's at least one going on right now where we have older runners do more speed work or do more hill work and see what that does to their ankle power when they run on level flat ground. But I think if I were a betting man, I would bet that that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good bet. And also, I think that would dip into, like you mentioned, the psychosocial factors. There's this whole thing about, you think that, oh, I'm not going to do any hills anymore. I'm going to be sensible. But sprinting up a hill, I always kind of like to remind runners that maximal kind of like sprint up a hill, you're probably putting your body through less stress than if you're doing kind of like a medium paced kind of run along the flat, because the whole incline of the hill is going to stop you from traveling that fast. It may feel like the exertion is huge on you, so like cardiovascularly is challenging you, but you can actually, it's probably a safer way, to get your intensity rather than trying to go fast on a flat surface. So were we right in thinking that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think if you're looking to introduce some speed work into a runner, I think the best way to do it is start doing some hill work. And for a lot of the reasons that you just described, the eccentric loads, where you're trying to absorb that impact they're much lower when you're running uphill, and the loads tend to be more concentric as we go uphill. And we know that, for instance, muscle tends to get strained a little bit easier with high eccentric loads. So if you're reducing those by running uphill, I think that's maybe a smart way to do it. I mean, some other things reduce too when we go uphill. Our impact forces are lower as well. But again, for this population, it's just not an important thing for them because it just doesn't factor into the injuries that they get. If we were talking about maybe the adolescent runner, the impact forces will make a little bit bigger difference.
Okay. And as you warned, we're not saying that listen to this podcast, especially if you haven't done a hill yet, should try and find the most steepest hill in your town and jump it. In fact, the incline doesn't even have to be that big, does it? We're only talking about a slight incline for 10, 15 seconds. But yeah, as in always, gradually introducing these things to your training program, et cetera, and we will not be responsible for any injuries caused by listening to it. But anyway, let's take it back to the gym then. So strength training, we need to try and minimize this decreasing in strength, in this loosening off of the tendons. How do we go about it? Do we need the gym? Can we do it at home?
Well, I mean, so the nice thing about plantar flexors are they don't really need a lot of specialized equipment to do some strength training, but what you do need is enough load. So just doing a standing heel raise where you're standing on the edge of a step and letting your heel drop down below and raising up, that's going to be just a great kind of core exercise for the for runners as we age. And so for me, I mean, that's something I do. I do a lot of calf raises I go to the gym 2 to 3 times a week, and I definitely make sure I spend some time taking care of my plantar flexors. And when you look at doing those calf raises, that's going to be a great way to do that. And of course, that's going to kind of really hit, your gastrocnemius muscle and also your underlying soleus muscle, because we have 3 muscles that really make up your plantar flexors, your medial gastroc, your lateral gastroc, and your soleus. And when you look at those, the soleus is about 66% of the total muscle volume of our plantar flexors. And so when you look at working on the soleus, we need to have the knee bent a little bit more. And so that's where it's easier to target that muscle when we go to the gym and do seated calf raises. And I think for me, I think if you were to ask me what's the main exercise to do, if you're kind of pinched for equipment and you need to do it at home, do a standing calf raise. And best case scenario, join a gym and do some seated calf raises. And the reason is if you bend your knee more than 60 degrees, and certainly if you're at 90 degrees, it puts the gastrocnemius on slack because that muscle crosses the knee joint, and the muscle that's doing all the work there then is your soleus. And the reason why we care about the soleus so much is that when we run, the soleus, we talked about how important the plantar flexors are with running, but when you really look at and you break them down into the individual muscles, it's really the soleus that has the highest, far and away the highest loads and the highest contributor to our push-off force and our total support of our body mass when we're running.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big one that I try and make clear to an awful lot of runners. And to tell you the truth, I mean, I'm not... Obviously, strength training's got to fit into the runner's lifestyle, but if I've got a runner, particularly if they're rehabbing a calf strain or something and they need some weighted soleus exercises, I'm very keen that they actually, even if they just join up for gym for a month, because I think what the gym, in the case of soleus, you need, because I think I read somewhere that a healthy runner on average should be able to kind of, I can't remember how many reps it was, but we're talking about probably half your body weight on a single leg calf raise. As a respectable amount, which, so if you're talking about a 90k runner or something, that's like 45k, which you're not going to have hanging around your house. It's not like a dumbbell. It's going to be a couple of plates. I try and tell runners, just go to your local garden center and get a bag of compost or some cement or something, and people do this, but then you've got the problem with progression. The nice thing about a gym is once you see yourself getting stronger, you can go up the stack and get another thing, or you can chuck another 10k plates on top. Whereas if you're doing it at home, you haven't got that. What are you going to do? You're going to kind of add something on top of your bag of cement, or it's kind of, I'm big on gyms. I think you can get by without it, but especially if it's periodized and you're going to have a month or 2 months of strength training, then get down the gym and enjoy all that metal.
I mean, when you look at, just the benefits of strength training, everything from musculoskeletal health to even cognitive health and cardiovascular health. I mean, heavy strength training is really what you need to be doing. And I mean, the aerobic training aerobic benefits you get from running are great as well. So I think those two things together. But in order to really get the kind of loads that we really were talking about, you kind of really need to join a gym. And so I kind of, I sit there and talk to runners. I treat a lot of patients that have, these types of injuries, Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciopathy, and so forth. And for me, I'm like, look, joining a gym is $35, $40 a month. I mean, how much did you spend on your last pair of shoes? How much are you spending on like foam rollers and, and all kinds of other stuff that's maybe, sitting in a closet somewhere. This is going to be something that's not just going to help your running, but going to improve your overall health as well. So, for me, I'm like, if you're traveling, we can get it done with maybe a backpack and throw some loads in there. But I always try to get a runner into the gym. And my favorite exercise is that seated calf machine. And you can do that if you don't have a gym that has that, using what's called a Smith machine, which is basically a squat rack that's on some tracks, and putting that guy right on your thigh, maybe putting a big pad on there, I think is a great way to do that. But and I also think too that doing the standing calf raise in the Smith machine is the way to get it done there also.
Yeah. I think sometimes gyms miss out on, because I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, gym memberships declining because people are just taking it more outdoors now when they can. There's much more boot camps and kind of like fitness classes outside. But I think gyms need to kind of make themselves look a little bit more for the athlete. They should have pictures of runners. They should have pictures of sports people to get away of that kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger era, Venice Beach kind of thing. That would attract more athletes because it's a huge membership. There's all of us telling runners you need to go and strength train. So if they go into a gym and there's kind of like runner's corner or something, that'd be a good stimulus to get some more members. So
Yeah. Well, I think that, I think from a strength training standpoint, I think if we kind of go back and kind of, attack some of the preconceived notions people have about strength training with runners, and you look at that, and you look at even older individuals. We know that if you strength train, quote unquote, for endurance, which a lot of runners, I'm doing it for endurance, when they're doing like 15 to 20 repetitions per exercise, you're not going to see the benefits that we're talking about. You're missing the boat. I mean, and the way I say it is, you really want to do a high repetition exercise, go for a run. If you want to work on strengthening your tendons and strengthening your muscles, go to the gym and lift some heavy weight and do it with your lower repetitions. And again, it kind of gets the idea of like staying out of that murky middle. It's like high rep, go for a run, strengthen your tendons, go to the gym and lift some weight. And we see that too when we look at, a nice study that's came out just this year looking at older individuals. They had control individuals who didn't do any strength training. Then we had folks who did moderate intensity strength training. And then they had another group that did the type of strength training we're talking about, which is 6 to 8 repetitions, 4 sets. And they found nice changes in tendon stiffness and, of course, muscle mass that you just don't see, certainly in that control group who's not doing anything. But you also don't see the same changes in tendon stiffness that you see if you're just doing moderate strength training. Now, the really interesting thing is that you still see changes in muscle volume, or so muscle hypertrophy, if you're doing moderate intensity, but you're going to fatigue. But in order to really get the changes in the tendon, you got to be lifting pretty heavy.
So hold on, bring that back to me. So you can still see hypertrophy if you're not taking yourself to fatigue, just using,
if you're doing high repetitions, but you're so really when you're strength training, you're going to get muscle hypertrophy.
Yeah.
If you hit fatigue. So if you're going, so if you're getting to failure, you're going to see muscle hypertrophy, but you're not going to see the same changes in tendon stiffness unless you're lifting heavy.
Okay, still hitting fatigue, but with less reps. Oh, that's interesting. And that's a study that's just come out, did you say?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. There's always this question, isn't there?
It's an older individuals too, so which is important to know.
All right, that's a good one. Okay, let's look out for that. Because there's always this question of, I think one thing on a basic level, and I think is where a lot of physios go wrong, is they're still kind of stuck in this 3 sets of 10. And patients, they mightn't even say that to patients, but patients go home and they just do 3 sets of 10. They stop at 10 because they've done 10. They could maybe do 20 or 30, but they just think, I've done my 10, have a 2-minute rest, do another 10. And there's definitely this element of needing, I think, of taking it to fatigue. This whole kind of, unless you give your body a reason to get stronger, it's not going to. But it's missed out. I think that's where an awful lot of, and it's a shame because, it's not just enough doing your strength training. You've got to actually fatigue the body and, get it to adapt. Is that fair enough?
No, absolutely. No, I think that people get hung up on like you said, the 3 sets of 10, and there really isn't anything necessarily wrong with 3 sets of 10, but the problem is that people are doing 3 sets of 10 and they're not getting to failure or near failure with their exercises. And then it becomes sub-therapeutic. You're just not, you might as well not be doing it. There's probably some benefits there, but you really need to be challenging yourself in the weight room.
Yeah. How are you? I've just thought of this now. Remember a while back, and this will probably apply to therapists watching. I can't remember the name of the guy, but remember with the calf lifts, the idea of rolling the towel up to put the toe into extension. The idea of doing.
Oh yeah. That's Michael Rathliff's group.
That was
Denmark.
It. Yeah. Is that still current, or was it over kind of done at the time and people jumped on it, or was there still some logic to that?
No, I think there's really good logic to it. So of course, when you do that, you've got your plantar fascia. And when we have high calf loads and we couple that with metatarsal phalangeal joint extension. So if you're extending your toes at the same time you're loading your calf, the load in your plantar fascia is quite high. And the idea behind doing that is to emphasize that toe extension as you raise up, that's going to make your toes extend even more. And then you've got load on you. And so the load on your plantar fascia is very, very, very high. And so, what you're doing though, and you can't lift that much weight when you're doing that exercise because the load on that plantar fascia is very, very high. And so, yeah, if I have a runner who's recovering from plantar fasciopathy, I do that quite a bit. But man, I take my time. I work on strengthening a lot of other things and start loading that plantar fascia because, of course, if you're just raising up on your toes, you're going to load that structure. But eventually, I'll move them to that because I know that I got to really target the load right onto that plantar fascia. And clinically, at least, I see, nice improvements, better improvements than if I just did plantar flexor strengthening. So it all depends. Like when you look at how do we load our calf muscles versus our plantar fascia, the easiest way to load our calf muscles is if we're letting our heel drop. We have high weight that is very hard to lift up here. And from into some dorsiflexion up through a couple degrees of plantar flexion. But when you're down here and your toes are not extended, the load on your plantar fascia is pretty low. So the way you can kind of think about it, if you want to optimize how you're targeting different structures, if you want to target your plantar flexors, you need to be strength training down here. If you want to target your plantar fascia, you need to be getting up on your toes. And you probably need to use different weights for that because you can't lift as much up here.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, definitely. I mean, it kind of, because I sometimes purposely go into forums, like running forums, just to see what people are kind of complaining about and injured runners, and it always kind of breaks my heart when I see kind of plantar fasciitis or the other names they prefer to call it these days. There's people who say I haven't run for a year, I can't get rid of it, and I just kind of drop like, have you tried any strength exercises? And it's kind of, I've been stretching, roll it with a golf ball, do this, do that, ice and Evian bottles. And it's like, and then maybe someone's been doing some calf raises and I say, what with weights? And I just my body weight. And it's like, who have you been going to see for a year? It's just, which is why I do this podcast, because I'm not saying there's just, I don't know, a lack of education, not just amongst runners, but amongst healthcare professionals as well. And probably people who then read your own work. That's why I have people like you on the show, so we can educate the physios as well as the runners.
Yeah, I think that stretching and like for those types of people, I think that stretching and maybe body weight heel raises have their place. I think that early on, in the very early stages, when you're kind of what we would kind of consider to be maybe that pain dominant stage, because you want to be loading these structures. These are capacity injuries, meaning you've extended the capacity of the tissue, and the only way that you're going to basically get that runner back to running is if you raise that capacity ceiling, and you have to do that through progressive strength training. So if that means starting off with stretching, but I think stretching is probably just a low load loading exercise, because you're not really going to change the length of that plantar fascia. You're just loading that tissue, but you have to move on from that. So if some people like, I got a little bit better with some stretching, or I got a little bit better with some standing heel raises, awesome. Okay, let's add some weight. You got to continue to raise that ceiling up. But if you have someone who's just sitting on the couch rolling a frozen water bottle or golf ball under their foot, their capacity, they're losing it, and it's just going down and down and down. And so that runner's probably going to struggle with that injury for a long time.
Yeah.
I see the same thing. I get on forums all the time. I'm a lurker, I guess.
Yeah.
And because it just makes me, when I get on in these different injury forums, like Let's Run. I don't know if I think that's kind of big in the US. I get on there and look at the advice that's been given around, and it makes me really realize that, like, we don't necessarily have, like, sure, the evidence is coming along, and that's great. But we really have a knowledge translation problem. How can we help runners understand what are going to be best practices for these injuries? Because rolling around on a golf ball is not going to make plantar fascia pain better.
It definitely is. Yeah. And that's part of the challenge, I think, is just getting this information through to the runners. But that's why I think educating the physios, whilst there's still physios giving out, roll your foot on this and nothing else. And I think that's part of the problem, And also I want runners to turn around more to kind of their healthcare professionals and say, you haven't given me any strength exercises. I heard the other day that I should be doing some of this, and just get the healthcare professional to go, oh, Jesus, what have you been watching? Just to update their knowledge. Otherwise, it's just, the instance is just going to stay there. But anyway, right, Masters Runner. So basically you are, so far we've recommended definitely lower leg calf strengthening, taking it to maximum, not being afraid to take it to fatigue. time is obviously a problem for some runners, maybe more so the older runner who's got children and work. And how many times a week are we saying would be necessary to see changes with strength training?
Yeah, I mean, optimal is going to be 3 times per week from a frequency standpoint. But I think if you're, pinched for time, I think, twice a week is going to be great as well. Of course, it all depends on the time of season. So in the off season or preseason, I think that's a great time to be getting in the gym 3 times per week. Once you start getting into, if you're kind of looking at more of a periodized schedule for your year, the off season, more times. Once you start getting into some of your higher training loads, you need to drop down to twice per week. And certainly once you start getting even closer to your competition, you need to start looking at dropping down to 1 time per week. And with that, you should be doing your strength training right up until your event. A lot of times people will say, oh, I'm in my competitive phase or whatever. But for the runners I work with, I have them do if they have a race on a Sunday, I have them do their last strength training session on a Tuesday. And going right up to it, because we start to lose those changes once we stop strength training. You use it or lose it, you start losing those relatively quickly. So I think that's important for runners to understand that really strength training should be a year-round activity. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing year-round, but kind of break it up based on the time of year that you're in.
And how about like once a week? So I'm not sure if there's been any studies on strength training, but I remember some studies showing that kind of the injury incidence rate could be as high as if you're only getting out once a week as if you're running 7 days a week. It's kind of like a U-shaped curve. Can that be for strength training? Are you kind of potentially wasting your time just going once a week because you're stressing your body out but not giving it enough reason to actually adapt?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I should say the 1 time per week, that's purely going to be from a maintenance standpoint. I don't know if you might see some small strength gains there, but I don't know if you're going to see big changes there. So I think that's kind of basically holding on to the gains that you picked up with when you're going 3 times per week and twice per week. Right. But it's really important for runners to understand that when you're doing this, you're introducing more overall training load to the person. And so when I have someone who comes in and I start putting them on a strength training program, I have them temporarily reduce their running volume for a while, because if they're already kind of running right at the kind of their overall kind of capacity for what they can tolerate, and then you suddenly throw this strength training program onto them, then you're really looking for some problems there. So. And I think as a point of clarification too, and you and I, it sounds like you and I kind of see this very similarly, that the higher weight, lower repetition is the way to go. But for someone who's kind of a novice strength trainer, you haven't been in the gym for a while, you really need to start off at 2 sets of 15 reps, for a couple of weeks, and then kind of work your way down into those loads. And that's always kind of where you need to be pointing yourself toward.
Okay, that's great. What about in terms of, it's interesting you said running, often we find ourselves talking about this sort of 80-20 principle of 80% of the time running at kind of like even low intensity and 20% making sure you're going for it. Would that be similar with strength training? Do you kind of divide it into easy and hard sessions, or you kind of maintain the same kind of session each time? Say you're going 3 times a week.
Well, I think when you look at some of the evidence for maximizing muscle hypertrophy, you're kind of seeing 2 heavy, what you see science recommend is 2 heavy days per week and 2 moderate load days per week, but you're still going to failure every day. Okay. So when I think about, and I mean, strength is important, don't get me wrong, but when I tell runners, I'm like, look, it's more about getting strong than being strong. And that's why I think even runners who kind of perceive themselves as, I'm a big strong runner, they should still be doing some strength training, because it's not just the muscle that's getting stronger, it's the tendon and everything that's attached to the tendon and bone and including. And so for me, I think more of it from a heavy lifting standpoint, because what I care about those connective tissues, because that's where most injuries are going to be occurring. So for me, I don't know, I think if I were looking at what are going to be the recommendations that a runner is really going to be able to make work into their program and be consistent with, I keep coming back to the 2 times per week. That's kind of going to be the best scenario where I know that runner is going to be able to keep up with it and not feel like they're losing a lot of their time that they're going to be able to spend doing what they really like doing, which is running.
Yeah, of course. And I suppose if they're concentrating especially on lower legs and maybe doing a bit of hamstrings, and we're not looking for a massively long session, are we? How they could potentially get through it if they're doing a couple of sets or 3 sets. We're looking at maybe a 30-40 minute session in the gym max.
Yeah, I go to the gym twice a week. I'm in and out 35-40 minutes tops.
Yeah.
It's not long. So and then I generally would go for an easy run after, or maybe later on in the day during my lunch break. But yeah, so it doesn't take very long.
Excellent. Okay then. Right. Oh, looking at the clock always, I'm gonna have to turn these into longer sessions. We've already been talking for an hour. Just briefly, because it's all been quite lower leg dominant. Is there anything? I mean, any other muscle groups that it'll depend on the runner, but should we also be looking at any other particular exercise which you'd favour runners to do? They've done their calf raises. What else, if they've got another 20 minutes, should they be looking at?
Yeah. So generally, I have new calf raises, seated soleus raises. I think other great exercises are going to be some sort of squat exercise. And again, working on doing some heavy weight. So whether that means getting into a leg press, or the exercise that I really like a lot are split squats. So that's probably one of my favorite exercises for runners. Lunges are great as well. And so doing those exercises are going to be hitting your hip extensors and your quadricep muscles. We don't want to, even though we're emphasizing the plantar flexors so much, those muscles are still really important, particularly the quadriceps. And then I generally have runners do at least one hamstring exercise. So like a single leg, like Romanian deadlift, I think is a great one. Or maybe just getting on a hamstring curl machine. But those are going to be the exercises that you're going to be doing, is more kind of deadlifts, weighted lunges. I'm a big fan of the knee extension machine also. So if you're looking for something else to kind of round out your program, that's going to be kind of the other things that you're going to be doing. So if you're looking at doing 3 sets, 3 to 4 sets of 8 repetitions, and those are your core 5 exercises, I think it's pretty easy to get in and out of the gym in about 40 minutes. I don't think that's too much of a challenge. Yeah. As long as you're not spending too much time on your phone and chatting up your friends.
Taking selfies, yeah.
Taking selfies, that's right. So you're the masters runner who's taking selfies in the gym. I guess maybe more power to you. So
yeah, exactly. And I think it's important because I think runners are very quick to put up barriers. It's like whenever say, which gym should I join? I'm like, the one that's closest to you, the one that's easiest to park at, the one that's going to, make it easier for you to actually go. You're just lifting heavy stuff, and like you say, you could do it at home. You could get some gear at home in your garage. You just need some heavy iron, which you can pick up secondhand. Doesn't have to be that expensive. No. It's just avoiding these barriers, because runners don't like it, do they? They just want to get out and be free and kind of do their Forrest Gump down the lane. They don't want to be lifting heavy weights.
Yeah, so and clinicians too. I mean, clinicians, they should look around their clinic. If they don't have heavy weight, some heavy dumbbells, some weight machines where they can really kind of target the quadriceps or target the plantar flexors. That's a good time to start talking to your clinic owner about investing in that kind of equipment, because it's not, when you compare it to some of the other equipment out, let's say an ultrasound machine, that's pretty cheap. Like you said, you can get all that stuff secondhand. And you give me a good, a wide range of dumbbells and a knee extension machine, because in our gym, we use a knee extension machine. We kind of rig it up so we can do the seated calf raises with it. I mean, that I can treat 90% of the running injuries that come into our clinic just with that way to do that. Good.
Right, I saw one question. I just want to bring up David's question, because after all, I did say if you've got any questions, then ask you. Let me just have a quick check. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, about the shuffling kind of thing. He's just, for those on the podcast, it says, so interesting, guys. Thank you, David. I find it really hard to do almost anything but shuffle on my easy runs. Does it matter as the impact is less than running a faster workout? In the end, I spend more time per week running easy. Could you comment on different mechanics at different paces? So basically, David's worried about the fact when he is having an easy run, he feels like he's shuffling.
Yeah. So I think, what I would say to that is there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, yeah, when you're going easy, your step length is less, and your impact forces are certainly lower. Yeah, that's exactly. And that, I think though, that you got to intersperse that with some higher intensity training. And that goes back to the idea that, like, if that's the only type of running you're doing, which is easy, and I'm not saying, I don't think that this gentleman does that, but let's say the average runner, if that's all that they kind of do, that's going to be the way that they end up running. And I think that goes back to one of the studies we talked about earlier, that if you're doing more higher, if you're interspersing some higher intensity work into your or sessions into your week, and it only needs to be one time per week, that's going to help you maintain, at least theoretically, when you look at the cross-sectional data, and maintain that step length, reduce the amount that you're shuffling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I would say that running slow and that's kind of what we need to do most of the time.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to runners that 70-80% of the time, depending on where you are in your kind of race plans and stuff, you should feel like I'm not doing enough. I'm just taking this too easy, because that's when you're building your aerobic capacity. And then you should feel like when it is that 20% of the time for hard workout, it's like you should be like, scratching at the door, ready to get out for that Tuesday or Wednesday when you can actually, put some intensity in there. So
I think that's a key point. You need to come into that session well rested, and if you're running kind of that moderate intensity every day, you're just not going to have that pep that you need to really get what you need out of that higher intensity session.
Definitely right. Well, look, it's 4:35. There's so much more we could have talked about. I wanted to there's so much more, but anyway, I'm sure there's enough information in there to keep more than a few clinicians and runners happy. There's one thing I've got to ask you to do before you do go, and that's just you've got to give me. I've been running a competition to get a free ticket at the conference, which sadly you can't join us at, because you've got another conference around that time, haven't you? Have you got something?
I do. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't make it.
What have you got that's more important than the Run Chat Live conference?
We have the International Patellofemoral Pain Retreat is kind of right around that same time, and so it's just it's a big trip. I hope to join for the second iteration. So
where is that again? Where's the patellofemoral?
It's in Milwaukee.
Right. Okay then.
Milwaukee. Yeah. So, but
I can see that. Milwaukee, Brighton. Yeah, that's fair enough.
I would love to come, but
another year. That's fine. No, but thank you for just considering it. But,
I'd love to.
But what have you been doing? Oh, of course you have. You were here in March, weren't you? In Pure Sports, when you're Canary Wharf, and you're back again there soon. Did you say? Or
I'm coming in January.
Magnificent.
And then I'm also going to be in Scotland on that same trip, doing a course. And then I'm also kind of tagging on another one in Belgium on that kind of that swing over there. Cool. So it's kind of putting together some courses with some collaborators, and so it'll be a great trip.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I've had for the last week just a chance to win a free place on our conference in October in Brighton. I've actually got 39 people on this list in front of me here, so I've just got to ask you, Dr. Rich Willy, to pick a number. Don't feel too pressurized. You're just kind of giving this person £235 worth of conference for free, so take your time. Just give me a number between 0 and how many we got on here? 35. Yeah,
let's do 28.
28, exciting. I'll edit in a drum roll on the podcast version of this.
Okay.
28, scrolling down, and we've got Manny on Instagram. Oh yeah, Manny_O on Instagram. I remember Manny. He produces some good videos. I think he had some Gait retraining videos on Instagram. Well, there you go. Manny _O on Instagram. Dr. Richard Willy has just given you £235, mate. To come to the Brighton conference on the 30th and 31st. So you should definitely tweet him a thank you. You're on Twitter most of all, aren't you, Richard?
I'm on Twitter. We also have an Instagram account. I'm starting to spend more time on there because I like pictures. So our Instagram account is Montana Running Lab.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a good place to follow us. And sorry I can't make it. It looks like you've got a great host of speakers. So I've got a couple collaborators in there, JF Escoulier and Izzy Moore, and who I think is fantastic. So
definitely, I'm sure they'll be referencing you anyway. I'm sure your name will come up many a time as soon as they dip into the research. We go, So maybe next year, right? What I'm going to do then, Rich, is I'm going to just put you back down in the lobby again for 2 minutes just to say goodbye to everyone, and then I'll come back and thank you officially in a couple of minutes.
All right, thank you.
All right, so thank you very much for coming along.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Right then, fantastic. Awesome amount of information in there for the Masters runner, and that's you if you're 35 years plus, male or female. We've looked at physiological changes as well as the psychosocial changes, which all kind of make you up, which could well be meaning you need to make a few changes to your running sessions, the strength training, and so forth. So hopefully there's a lot of information for you, and also for the clinicians who are working with the older runner, taking into consideration what Rich said about the calf training, the soleus training, above all. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed it. The Manny_O, if you're listening to this, I'll contact you anyway on Instagram, let you know. Congratulations. We'll see you down in Brighton on the 30th and the 31st, which is Halloween, for the One Chat Live International Running Conference. And there'll be details of that all in the notes. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. I'll just say thank you to the Brighton Beer Company once again. Don't forget, there is a 15% discount if you use the code RCL15. That starts on Monday. So if it's for you or for your husband or boyfriend or anybody who happens to have a beard, then make sure you use that discount. So that's it. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next week, I think. Or that's that time of day. Let's see who's got to follow Dr. Rich Willy. I wouldn't like this as, let's see, setting the bar very high now. Next Sunday will be, Mr. Jeff Gaudette of Runners Connect. So the founder of Runners Connect, who I used to write for, will be with us next Sunday. Keep an eye on social media. Until then, we'll say goodbye and adios.
You're listening to One Chat Live podcast, putting the evidence back into running injury and performance.